My name is Victoria. I'm 67 years old, and until recently, I believed I understood what family meant. I was wrong. The day everything changed didn't start with a storm or an argument. It started quietly in a polished office that smelled faintly of leather and old paper. The kind of place where people go to hear things that alter their lives forever. It was the day my husband's will was read, and the day my own daughter told me I didn't belong there. Victoria, you can wait outside. This doesn't really concern you.
Her voice was calm. Too calm.
That's what hurt the most. Not anger. Not even irritation.
Just certainty.
I remember gripping my handbag tighter, as if it could somehow hold me together. I had buried my husband just 12 days earlier. 41 years of marriage reduced to a wooden box, a quiet ceremony, and a house that no longer felt like home. And now this. I looked at her, trying to find something familiar in her face. Something soft. Something that reminded me of the little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder. There was nothing. Only distance. I'm his wife, I said, my voice barely steady. I think I should be here.
She sighed. Actually sighed.
Legally, maybe. But practically, everything has already been arranged. Arranged. That word echoed in my head. Across the desk, the attorney shifted in his chair. He looked uncomfortable, like someone who had walked into a private argument and couldn't find the exit. Miss Carter, he began cautiously. It would be more appropriate if Mrs. She'll be fine, my daughter interrupted. She doesn't need to be involved in the details. I noticed how she avoided looking directly at me, like I was something inconvenient, something to step around. Beside her sat Margaret, my late husband's mother, 80 years old, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed, and just as cold as she had been the first day I met her. "Oh, Victoria," she said sweetly, with that tone I had learned to distrust decades ago. "Why don't you get some fresh air? These legal things can be so exhausting."
Exhausting. I almost laughed, because I knew what exhaustion really felt like. Exhaustion was sleeping in a hospital chair for weeks. Exhaustion was memorizing medication schedules at 3 a.m. Exhaustion was watching the man you love fade away, one breath at a time. But none of that mattered here. Here I was just unnecessary. "I'll stay," I said quietly. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then my daughter finally looked at me, and the expression in her eyes. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment, like I had failed some invisible test. "Victoria," she said, slower now, as if speaking to someone difficult, "you've never handled financial matters. This is complicated. It's better if I deal with it. Better if I deal with it." I felt something sink inside me. All the years I had spent supporting this family, all the sacrifices, all the quiet compromises, reduced to that. "You think I can't understand?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "I think you've never had to." That one landed harder than anything else, because part of me wondered if she actually believed it, or worse, if I had somehow allowed her to. Margaret gave a small approving nod, like this was all going exactly as expected. The attorney cleared his throat again. "Mrs. Carter," he said gently, turning to me, "there are specific clauses that—" I said she can wait outside. My daughter snapped. That was it. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not broke. Not shattered. Just moved. Quietly. Like a door closing. "Fine," I said. I stood up slowly, steadying myself against the arm of the chair. No one tried to stop me. No one said, "Stay." No one even hesitated. As I reached the door, I heard my daughter's voice again, softer now, but still clear enough. "She'll calm down. She always does." I paused. Just for a second. Then I walked out. The hallway was empty. Too bright. Too quiet. I sat down on one of the chairs outside the office, my hands folded in my lap, like I didn't know what else to do with them. Through the frosted glass, I could see blurred shapes moving. I imagined them settling in, relaxing,
preparing to divide a life I had helped build. I should have felt angry, but I didn't. I felt tired. And something else. Something deeper. For months, I had been feeling it, growing slowly inside me. A quiet awareness that something wasn't right, that I was fading out of my own life. It hadn't started today. It had started much earlier. 6 months ago, the day my husband got his diagnosis. That was when everything began to change. At first, it was subtle. Whispers that stopped when I entered the room. Conversations that didn't include me. Decisions made for my sake. "You're under too much stress," my daughter had said one afternoon. "Let me handle things." Handle things. At the time, I thought she was helping. I was grateful. I had no idea I was being replaced. Little by little, I was pushed to the side. Doctor appointments scheduled without telling me. Medical discussions I wasn't invited to. Even simple updates filtered through someone else. "Don't worry about the details," they would say. As if I hadn't been the one holding everything together. As if I hadn't been the one there, every single day. And the worst part? My husband didn't see it. Or maybe he couldn't. He was too weak, too tired, too overwhelmed. And they used that. I remember one evening clearly. I had stepped out of the room to get water. When I came back, I heard voices.
Low. Urgent.
"She's not coping well," my daughter was saying.
Even noticed, Margaret replied.
"We need to make sure she doesn't interfere with important decisions." Interfere. I stood there, frozen, listening, understanding. For the first time, I wasn't part of the family anymore. I was a problem to manage. Back in the present, sitting outside that office, I closed my eyes. And for the first time in months, I let myself think, really think, about everything. About what had been happening. About what I had ignored. About what I had allowed. And then, from inside the office, a scream. Sharp.
Shocked.
Followed by chaos. Voices raised.
Chairs scraping.
Papers rustling. "This can't be right." My daughter. I recognized her voice instantly. I stood up slowly. My heart started beating faster. Something had gone wrong. Something unexpected. And for the first time that day, I felt something other than sadness.
Curiosity.
I didn't rush into the office when I heard the scream. That might sound strange, but something inside me told me to wait. After everything that had happened, after being dismissed like I didn't matter, I wasn't going to run back the second they needed me. So I stood there in the hallway, just a few steps from the door, listening. "This is wrong," my daughter said again, her voice shaking now. "There has to be some kind of mistake." "There is no mistake," the attorney replied calmly. His voice hadn't changed at all. Steady. Professional.
Certain.
"Your father was very clear about his intentions." Intentions. The words settled heavily in the air. I moved a little closer to the door, close enough to hear every word, but not close enough to be seen through the glass. "Read it again," Margaret demanded, her voice sharp, no longer hiding behind politeness. "There must be something else. Another document. An addendum." "There is," the attorney said. "And I will read it. But I suggest you listen carefully this time." There was a pause. The kind that makes your chest tighten. Then papers shifted. And everything changed. "Regarding my daughter," the attorney began, "I have observed her behavior during my final months with increasing concern." My breath caught. He had written this himself. "Her treatment of my wife, Victoria, has revealed a lack of compassion and respect that I cannot ignore. Her focus on financial matters, rather than emotional support, has caused me great distress in my final days." I felt my hand rise to my mouth. He had seen. He had noticed. All those moments I thought went unseen, they hadn't. Inside the office, there was complete silence now. Then my daughter spoke again, but this time her voice was smaller, tighter. That's not what happened." The attorney didn't react. "I will continue," he said. "I have also witnessed attempts to exclude my wife from important medical decisions, despite her being the primary caregiver throughout my illness. These actions were not only unnecessary, but deeply hurtful. My chest ached because I remembered every one of those moments. Every time I was told to rest. Every time I was asked to step aside. Every time I felt like I was losing my place in my own life. And all along, he knew. Therefore, the attorney continued, I have made the decision to limit my daughter's inheritance to a fixed sum of $5,000 to be held in trust. What? My daughter's voice broke completely now. 5,000? That's ridiculous. I'm his daughter. Until she demonstrates consistent care and respect toward her mother over a period of no less than 1 year. Silence. Then something crashed. A glass, maybe. Or something thrown in anger. That's insane, Margaret snapped. This is manipulation.
He was sick.
He wasn't thinking clearly. I felt something cold settle in my chest at her words. Even now, even after everything, she still refused to accept responsibility. The attorney didn't raise his voice. Your son anticipated that concern, he said. There is detailed documentation confirming his mental clarity at the time of signing. More papers, more movement. And then, the next part. To my mother, he read, who contributed to the emotional isolation of my wife during my illness, I leave the sum of $1,000. A sharp inhale. Margaret. I encourage her to reflect on her actions and the consequences they have had on the people around her. You cannot be serious, she whispered. But there was no power left in her voice now. Only disbelief. I leaned against the wall, my legs suddenly unsteady. It felt like the world had tilted, like everything I thought I understood was being rewritten. But then who gets everything else? My daughter asked quietly. And for the first time, I was afraid to hear the answer. The remainder of the estate, the attorney said, including all properties, accounts, and investments, is left entirely to Victoria. Everything. The word echoed in my head. Everything. I closed my eyes, not because I was overwhelmed by the money, but because of what it meant. He had trusted me. He had chosen me. After everything that had happened, he had seen the truth. Inside the office, no one spoke for several seconds. Then my daughter's voice came again, barely above a whisper. She manipulated him. There it was. The accusation I had expected. The one that would have broken me before. He was vulnerable, she continued. He was confused. She took advantage of that. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. No, the attorney said firmly. He was very clear. In fact, he anticipated this exact reaction. More papers. And then, a letter, he said, written specifically for this moment. My heart started beating faster. A letter. To my daughter, he read, his voice softer now. If you are hearing this, it means you have chosen to question my decisions. I pressed closer to the door. Every word mattered. I want you to understand something clearly. I was not confused. I was not manipulated. I was watching. Watching. That word hit harder than anything else. You visited me to discuss finances. Your mother sat with me in silence when I was too tired to speak. I felt tears sting my eyes. You asked about assets. She asked about my pain. My chest tightened. You saw my illness as a problem to manage. She saw it as time we still had together. Inside the room, someone started crying. I didn't know who. Maybe both of them. You dismissed your mother, the letter continued, at a time when she needed support the most. You spoke about her as if she were incapable, when she was the only one holding everything together. I slid down slightly against the wall, unable to stay fully upright, because every word was true. I cannot trust my life's work to someone who treats the most important person in my life as if she were disposable. Disposable. That was the word I had felt for months, but never said out loud. Until now. The letter ended quietly, but its impact didn't. No one spoke. No one moved. The silence was heavy, thick, unavoidable. and, for the first time, they had nothing to say. I stood there for a moment longer. Then I straightened, wiped my face, and took a slow breath. Whatever was waiting for me inside that room. I was no longer the same woman who had walked out of it earlier. Something had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. I reached for the door handle,
paused,
and then pushed it open. When I walked back into the room, everything felt different. Not because the furniture had moved or the light had changed, but because I had. Just an hour earlier, I had left this office feeling small, dismissed, almost invisible. Now, as the door closed quietly behind me, all three of them turned to look at me, and for the first time in a very long while, I wasn't the one shrinking under their gaze. My daughter's face was pale, her makeup slightly smudged, her perfect composure cracked in a way I had never seen before. Margaret looked older than she had an hour ago, her sharp posture softened, her hands gripping the armrests as if she needed something solid to hold on to. The attorney simply nodded at me, as if he had been expecting me to return all along. "Victoria," he said gently, "please have a seat." I sat down in the same chair I had been asked to leave earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't mention it. I didn't need to. The silence in the room said enough. For a moment, no one spoke. My daughter looked at me like she didn't quite recognize who I was anymore, like she was trying to reconcile the woman she thought I was with the one now sitting calmly in front of her. Finally, she broke the silence. "Mom," she started, her voice unsteady. "We need to talk about this." I held her gaze. "We are talking." She swallowed, glancing briefly at the documents on the desk before looking back at me. "This isn't right. You know that. Dad wouldn't just cut me out like that." I didn't react immediately. I had spent years reacting, softening my words, cushioning my responses, making things easier for everyone else. But not this time. "He didn't cut you out," I said quietly. "He made a decision." "A decision based on what?" She shot back, a hint of her old sharpness returning. "On what you told him. On how you made things look." There it was again. The need to turn this into something I had done, something I had caused. For a second, the old instinct kicked in, the urge to defend myself, to explain, to prove that I hadn't manipulated anything. But then I remembered the letter. His words. He had already spoken for me. I didn't have to make anything look like anything, I said. He saw it himself. Margaret let out a quiet scoff. "He was sick," she said, though there was far less conviction in her voice now. "People in that condition, they don't always think clearly." The attorney shifted slightly. "As I've already explained, he was of sound mind. There is extensive documentation." "Yes, we heard you," my daughter interrupted, frustration creeping back in. Then she turned to me again, her expression changing, softening just slightly. "Mom, just tell me the truth. Did you talk to him about this? Did you influence him?" For a moment, I just looked at her. Really looked. And what I saw wasn't just anger or greed. There was fear there too. Confusion. Maybe even guilt, buried somewhere under everything else. But it didn't change what had happened. "No," I said simply. She stared at me, searching for something in my face. A crack. A hesitation. Something she could use. She didn't find it. "Then why?" she whispered. "Why would he do this?" I could have answered that question in 100 different ways. I could have listed every moment she ignored him, every time she dismissed me, every conversation I overheard that wasn't meant for me. But I didn't. Because the truth was simpler than all of that. Because he was paying attention, I said. The room fell quiet again. Then the attorney cleared his throat softly. "There is something else your husband wanted me to discuss with you, Mrs. Carter. In private." My stomach tightened slightly. Something in his tone shifted, becoming more careful, more deliberate. "It's all right," I said. "They can stay." I don't know why I said that. Maybe part of me was tired of hiding things. Maybe I already knew what was coming. The attorney hesitated, then nodded. He reached for a folder on the desk and slid it toward me. Your husband discovered this about 3 weeks before he passed, he said. I felt my chest tighten as I opened the folder. I already knew what was inside before I even looked. Medical reports, test results, appointments, all the things I had hidden, all the things I thought no one knew about. My daughter leaned forward slightly. What is that? I didn't answer right away. My fingers traced the edge of one of the papers, the familiar clinical language staring back at me. Words I had memorized. Words I had lived with in silence. Victoria, the attorney said gently. I took a breath. And then I said it. I have cancer. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My daughter blinked, as if she hadn't heard me correctly. What? Stage 2, I continued, my voice steadier than I expected. I've known for 8 months. 8 months. I watched as the meaning of that settled over her. Her eyes widened, her face draining of color. 8 months, she repeated. Why didn't you tell us? I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because the answer was so painfully obvious. When would I have told you? I asked quietly. Between the times you told me I was overreacting, or when you said I was just tired, or maybe when you suggested I was imagining things. She flinched. Good. Because for the first time, she was hearing it. Really hearing it. I didn't want to be a burden, I added. Your father was already fighting for his life. I wasn't going to add to that. Margaret sank back in her chair. Her expression completely changed now. Gone was the cold superiority. In its place was something I had never seen from her before. Shock. You're saying all this time, she murmured. Yes, I said. All this time. The attorney spoke again, quietly. Your husband found the medical documents accidentally. He was looking for something else. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course he did. He always found things. Even the things I tried to hide. He was very upset, the attorney continued. Not because you were ill, but because you felt you had to go through it alone. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. I hadn't cried when I got the diagnosis. I hadn't cried during the treatments, the appointments, the long nights. But this broke something open. He spent his final weeks researching treatment options for you, the attorney said, opening another section of the folder. Specialists, clinics, experimental therapies. He made detailed financial arrangements to ensure you would have access to the best care available. I looked down at the pages. Appointments already scheduled. Doctors already contacted. Plans already made. Even at the end of his life, he had been trying to save mine. My daughter covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear I didn't know. I believed her, but it didn't change anything. Of course you didn't, I said. She looked at me, confusion and pain mixing together. Why are you saying it like that? Because you never asked, I replied. The words were quiet, but they landed hard. Silence filled the room again, heavier than before. And, in that silence, everything was finally out in the open. No more assumptions. No more pretending. Just the truth. Raw. Uncomfortable. Unavoidable. My daughter's voice came again, smaller now. What happens now? I looked at her. At Margaret. At the papers spread across the desk. And then I answered honestly. For the first time, I said slowly, I think that decision is mine. The strange thing about finally telling the truth is that it doesn't feel dramatic in the moment. There's no thunder, no sudden shift in the world outside. Everything looks the same office, the same people, the same quiet ticking of the clock on the wall. But inside, something settles. Like a long-held breath finally released. Like a weight you didn't fully realize you were carrying has been quietly set down. That's exactly how I felt sitting there after I told them about the cancer. Not lighter, exactly, but clearer. For so long, I had been reacting to everything, adjusting, accommodating, softening, stepping aside. Now, for the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was simply there, present, and strangely calm. My daughter was still staring at me, her eyes red, her expression lost somewhere between guilt and disbelief. Margaret hadn't said anything else, which in itself felt like something significant. The attorney sat quietly, giving the moment space, as if he understood that whatever happened next didn't belong to legal documents anymore. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" my daughter asked again, her voice barely above a whisper, like if she said it louder it might break something fragile between us. I could have answered with anger. I had enough of it stored up after months of being dismissed, ignored, spoken over. But anger suddenly felt exhausting. Instead, I leaned back slightly in the chair and looked at her in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before, without filtering, without trying to protect her from the truth. Because every time I tried to say anything about how I felt, I said, "You explained it away." She shook her head immediately. "That's not true." "It is," I said, still calm. "You told me I was tired. You told me I was emotional. You told me I was overreacting." After a while, I stopped trying. The room went quiet again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was heavy, reflective. She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers together. I noticed how small that gesture made her look, how much it reminded me of when she was a child and had done something wrong but didn't yet know how to admit it. "I thought," she started then stopped. "What?" I asked. "I thought you were strong," she said finally. "I thought you didn't need help." That almost made me smile, not because it was comforting, but because it was so tragically misunderstood. "I was strong," I said, "because I had to be, not because I didn't need help." That landed. I could see it in her face, in the way her expression shifted as something clicked into place. Margaret finally spoke then, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "We thought we were protecting him," she said, almost to herself. "Keeping things organized, efficient." I turned my head slightly toward her. For decades, that voice had always carried authority, certainty, a sense that she knew best. Now it sounded unsure, almost fragile. "You weren't protecting him," I said. "You were controlling the situation." She didn't argue. That surprised me more than anything else that day. "I didn't realize," she murmured. "No," I said. "You didn't." Another silence followed, but this one felt different again. Less like something breaking, more like something settling. The attorney glanced at me. "Mrs. Carter," he said gently, "your husband left very specific instructions regarding your care. Financially, everything is already arranged. You won't need to worry about treatment costs or housing or—" "I know," I interrupted softly. And I did. For the first time, I really understood what that inheritance meant. It wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was security. It was the removal of every excuse I had ever used to put myself last. My daughter looked up again. "So, what are you going to do?" she asked. There it was, the question that mattered. And for once, I didn't have an automatic answer. Because for most of my life, my decisions had never been entirely mine. They had been shaped by what was needed, what was expected, what would keep things running smoothly for everyone else. But now I had a choice. "I'm going to get treatment," I said slowly. "Proper treatment. Not the kind I try to squeeze in between taking care of someone else." She nodded quickly, almost too quickly. "Of course. Yes. That's good." "And I'm going to move," I added. That caught her off guard. "Move," she repeated. "Where?" "I don't know yet," I said. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere that feels like mine." The idea had been forming quietly in the back of my mind for weeks, maybe longer. A place where I wasn't defined by my role as someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's responsibility. "Just me." "You're leaving?" she asked, and there was something in her voice now, fear, maybe. "I'm starting over," I corrected gently. She swallowed. "Alone?" I held her gaze. "Yes." That word seemed to echo between us. Alone. For most of my life, that word had felt frightening. Empty. Now it felt peaceful. Margaret shifted in her chair. That seems drastic, she said, though even she didn't sound convinced. I turned to her. So, was everything that happened over the past 6 months?
She didn't respond.
My daughter leaned forward slightly. You don't have to do everything on your own, she said. We can help. I can help. I believed that she meant it, but I also knew something she didn't yet understand. I'm not doing this because I have to, I said. I'm doing it because I want to. That was new.
Want.
Not need. Not obligation. Want. She sat back slowly, absorbing that. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted quietly. For a moment, I just looked at her. My daughter. The same person who had told me to leave the room not so long ago. The same person who now looked like she was standing in the middle of something she didn't know how to navigate. You don't fix it all at once, I said. You start by seeing it clearly. Her eyes filled with tears again. I'm trying, she whispered. I nodded. I know. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The attorney began gathering the documents, giving us space again, letting the conversation settle into something quieter, something less confrontational. I stood up slowly. No one stopped me this time. No one told me to stay. But no one asked me to leave either. That alone felt like a shift. I'll be in touch, I said to the attorney. Of course, he replied. And Mrs. Carter, your husband believed in you very deeply. I paused at that, then nodded. I know, I said, because now, I finally did. As I walked out of the office again, the hallway didn't feel as cold as before. It didn't feel like a place I had been pushed into. It felt like a passage from one life into another. And this time, I wasn't being led. I was choosing where to go. 6 weeks later, I was standing on a balcony overlooking the ocean, watching the sun slowly sink into the horizon like it had all the time in the world. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink, and the sound of waves rolling and felt steady, grounding, almost like a heartbeat I could finally match my own to. The air smelled like salt and something new, something clean, untouched by everything I had left behind. I had moved. Not far enough to disappear, but far enough that nothing here belonged to my old life. No familiar streets, no memories attached to furniture, no routines built around other people's needs. Just a small, quiet apartment by the coast. Simple, bright, and entirely mine. That word still felt unfamiliar sometimes.
Mine.
For years, everything had been shared, adjusted, compromised. Even the smallest decisions, what to cook, where to sit, when to rest, had been influenced by someone else. Now, every object in this space existed because I chose it. The chair by the window, soft and slightly oversized. The light curtains that moved gently with the breeze. The stack of books I had bought simply because they interested me, not because they looked appropriate on a shelf. It wasn't a big place, but it felt like freedom. My treatment had started almost immediately after I arrived. No delays, no excuses, no trying to fit appointments around someone else's schedule. For the first time, my health was the priority, not something squeezed into the background of a life centered on others. The doctors here were attentive, focused, and direct. They spoke to me, not around me. They asked questions and waited for my answers. They explained things in detail, and when I didn't understand something, they didn't dismiss it, they clarified it. It sounds simple, but it felt revolutionary. The treatments were difficult, of course. There were days when the exhaustion pressed down so heavily I could barely get out of bed. Days when the nausea came in waves, when my body felt like it didn't quite belong to me anymore. But even on those days, there was something different. I wasn't alone in the way I had been before. Yes, physically, I was by myself in this apartment. But emotionally, I wasn't carrying everything in silence anymore. I had support from doctors, from nurses, from people whose entire job was to help me get through this. And more importantly, I allowed myself to receive that help. That was new too. Learning not to push it away. Learning not to say, I'm fine, when I wasn't. Learning to rest without guilt. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into treatment, I found myself sitting at the small kitchen table, staring at a cup of tea I had forgotten to drink. The sunlight was coming through the window at just the right angle, warming the surface of the table, and for a moment, I just sat there, noticing it. Really noticing it. Before, my mind would have been somewhere else, thinking about what needed to be done next, who needed something, what I might have forgotten. Now, there was nothing pulling me away from that moment. It was quiet, and instead of feeling empty, it felt full. My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me gently back. I looked down at the screen. My daughter. For a second, I considered letting it ring. Not out of anger, but out of habit. The old instinct to avoid complicated conversations. But then I picked it up. Hello. There was a brief pause on the other end, like she hadn't expected me to answer.
Mom.
Her voice sounded different.
Softer.
Less certain.
Raplia.
How are you feeling today? She asked. It was such a simple question, but it was also new. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Tired, I said honestly, but better than yesterday. I'm glad, she said quickly, and I could hear the relief in her voice. Did you have treatment this week? On Tuesday, I said. They say it's working. There was a small silence, then a quiet exhale. That's really good. We stayed like that for a moment, neither of us rushing to fill the space. It wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. I was thinking, she said finally, maybe I could come visit. Not for long, just for the day. I looked out at the ocean again, watching the waves move in steady, endless patterns. The old version of me would have said yes immediately, would have rearranged everything, prepared, made sure everything was perfect.
But now,
I paused. I'm not ready for a long visit, I said carefully, but you could come for lunch. Another pause. Then, okay. Yes, that would be nice.
Nice.
It was a small word, but it felt like a beginning. After we hung up, I sat there for a while, letting the conversation settle. There had been no accusations, no defensiveness, no pretending that everything was already fixed. Just a conversation. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. And that was enough for now. Later that week, I went for a walk along the shoreline. It had become a kind of ritual for me, something I did not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The sand shifted under my feet, the wind pulled gently at my hair, and the sound of the ocean filled every quiet space in my mind. As I walked, I thought about the life I had left behind. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. I had spent decades believing that love meant giving everything, that being needed was the same as being valued, that if I just did enough, cared enough, sacrificed enough, it would be seen. And in the end, it had been seen, just not by the people I expected. My husband had seen it, and in his own way, he had given me something I didn't even know I needed. Permission. Permission to stop. Permission to choose myself. Permission to live differently. I stopped walking and looked out at the horizon, where the sky met the water in a soft, endless line. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what came next in terms of responsibility. I was thinking about possibility, what I might want, what I might enjoy, who I might become without the constant weight of being everything for everyone. The wind picked up slightly, and I pulled my sweater closer around me, smiling faintly. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. There was no sudden reinvention, just small changes, quiet decisions, moments where I chose myself instead of disappearing. And somehow, that was enough to begin building an entirely new life. 18 months later, I stood in front of the mirror and studied the woman looking back at me. For a long time, I avoided mirrors, not out of vanity, but because I didn't recognize the person I had become during those years of exhaustion and quiet erasure. Now I looked directly, calmly, almost curiously. My hair had grown back, softer and lighter than before, streaked with silver I no longer tried to hide. My face carried lines I hadn't earned through worry this time, but through experience, through survival. And my eyes were different, brighter, steadier, present. I adjusted the light blue scarf around my shoulders and smiled slightly, not because everything in life had become perfect, but because for the first time, it felt like it belonged to me. The doctor had called the day before. No evidence of disease. 3 simple words. After everything, the treatments, the fear, the uncertainty, the quiet nights when I wondered if I had waited too long, they felt almost unreal. I had repeated them to myself several times, just to make sure they didn't disappear. No evidence of disease. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. The apartment had changed over the months, just as I had. It was no longer just a place I had moved into. It had become a reflection of who I was becoming. Paintings I had made during long afternoons when I needed distraction. Books I had actually read, not just displayed. A chair by the window that had become my favorite place in the world, where I could sit for hours and watch the ocean shift under different lights. There was a quiet confidence in the space now, a sense of permanence. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I glanced at the clock, then walked to the door and opened it. My daughter stood there, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled, a little nervous, a little hopeful.
Mom. Raplia, stepping asida. Come in.
She walked in slowly, looking around like she always did, taking in the changes. Each time she visited, there was something new, a painting, a different arrangement of furniture, small details that told a story she was still learning to understand. "These are for you," she said, handing me the flowers. "They're beautiful," I said, meaning it. "Thank you." I placed them in a glass vase and set them near the window, where the light could catch the yellow petals. For a second, I just looked at them, appreciating something simple without rushing past it. That, too, was new. When I turned back, she was still standing there, watching me. "You look different," she said. "I am different," I answered calmly. She nodded, like she expected that answer. We sat down across from each other, the same way we had during her previous visits, but the atmosphere had changed over time. In the beginning, everything between us had felt careful, measured, like we were both walking across thin ice. Now it felt more stable. Not fully healed, not effortless, but real. "I have news," I said. Her expression immediately shifted, concern flashing across her face. "Is everything okay?" I let that sit for a second. Then I smiled. "It is," I said. "I'm in remission." For a moment, she didn't react. Then her eyes widened, and her hand flew to her mouth. "Mom, that's—" She stopped, her voice breaking slightly. "That's amazing." There were tears in her eyes, but they weren't the same kind I had seen before. These weren't tears of panic or regret. They were relief. Genuine relief. "I'm really happy," she added, quieter now. "I know," I said. And this time, I truly believed it. We sat in silence for a few seconds, letting the moment settle between us. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't heavy. It was simply shared. "I've been thinking a lot," she said after a while, her voice thoughtful. "About everything. About how things were before. About how I treated you." I didn't interrupt. "I didn't see you," she continued. "Not really. I saw what I thought you were. What I needed you to be." That was honest. Painfully honest. "I thought being strong meant not needing anything," she said. "And I thought you were fine. Always fine." I leaned back slightly, considering her words. "I taught you that," I said. She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I spent most of my life pretending I didn't need anything," I explained. "So you believed it." That realization seemed to settle over her slowly. "I never meant to hurt you," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. "And I did."
That didn't erase the past, but it changed how I carried it. She hesitated for a moment, then reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. She asked me to give you this, she said. I didn't need to ask who she meant. Margaret. I took the envelope, but didn't open it right away. I already knew what it would contain: an apology, or something close to one. Over the past year, I had heard enough through my daughter to understand that even Margaret had changed, at least in some ways. Time, distance, and consequences have a way of doing that. Have you read it? I asked. She nodded. Yes. And it's sincere, she said carefully. But I know that doesn't mean you have to respond. I appreciated that. The old version of her would have pushed, insisted, tried to fix everything all at once. This version understood boundaries. I might read it later, I said, placing the envelope on the table. Just not today. She nodded. That's fair. We talked for a while after that, but not about anything heavy. About her work, about the small painting class I had started attending, about a book I had just finished. The conversation flowed more easily than it used to, not because everything was resolved, but because we weren't pretending anymore. At one point, she smiled and said, "You seem happy." I thought about that. Not the kind of happiness that comes from everything going perfectly, but something quieter, more stable. Yes, I said. I am. Later, after she left, I sat alone in my chair by the window, the same place where I had spent so many afternoons learning how to be still, how to listen to myself instead of everyone else. The sun was setting again, just like it had that first week I arrived here. But I wasn't the same woman watching it. Back then I had been rebuilding. Now, I was living. I picked up Margaret's letter, turning it over in my hands. I didn't rush to open it. I didn't feel obligated to. Whether I read it today, tomorrow, or never, that decision was mine. And that, more than anything, was the real change. For most of my life, I had been defined by what I gave. Now I was defined by what I chose. I set the letter down and looked out at the ocean, the horizon stretching endlessly in front of me. There was still time. Time to explore, to rest, to create, to feel, to exist without shrinking. Time to live a life I had almost never lived. And this time, I intended to live it fully.